Though once a great American automaker, Pontiac has been on a downward spiral since the 90s. Here are 15 cars that ensured its demise. 1971 to 1977, Pontiac Ventura, rebadged in weak Chevy Nova. Technically, the Pontiac Ventura was a rebadged Chevrolet Nova and could have been a great car, had GM not meddled with it and made it far less powerful than its Chevy sibling. The car came with a Pontiac 5.7-liter V8 engine, but detuned to literally one-third of its capable power. Sadly, what could have been an excellent pony car was turned into a weak passenger car. (1973 to 1977) Pontiac Aztec, rebadged an uglier Chevy Vega. For some reason, many of the Pontiac cars were often brutally neutered to make them lesser than their Chevrolet siblings. It's like Chevy was a favored son, and Pontiac a stepchild. The Aztec was a rebadged Chevrolet Vega, which was already pretty terrible. While the Aztec was a little more polished on the inside, the exterior looked downright ugly. 1980 to 1984. Pontiac Phoenix, the infamous X-body. Calling it a Phoenix turned out to be a misnomer, for it may have gone down in flames but never managed to rise from its ashes. An X-body GM car, the Phoenix, along with the Chevrolet Citation, Buick Skylark, and the Oldsmobile Omega, was plagued with recalls and issues all its short life. Plus, the Phoenix also had the distinction of locking its rear wheels when brakes were applied, making it even more of a pain. 1982 to 1988, Pontiac Sunbird, too many issues.
This man is not getting good mileage with his Pontiac Sunbird. He isn't getting 35 miles per gallon in the country and 22 miles per gallon in the city. But you can. It all depends on how you drive.
Sudden acceleration, boring performance, peeling paint, drab styling, and finally, transmission plus engine issues. The list of woes the owners of Pontiac Sunbird suffered from was endless. The newly introduced front-wheel drive made it even more boring to drive. Plus, it shared a platform with the Cadillac Cimarron. Need we say more? 1981 to 1987, Pontiac T1000, a rebadged Chevy Chevette. The Chevrolet Chevette was a failed car, which is why no one quite got the rebadged Pontiac T1000. Not only was it a boring name, but it was also a boring car, plagued with weak and inefficient engines despite the light and sporty build. It also rusted like nobody's business and ended up dying an ignominious death in 1987. 1984 to 1988, Pontiac Fiero, fiery-tempered Pontiac. There's a Pontiac Fiero in the TV series Young Sheldon, bought by Sheldon's father to appease his masculinity. As he tries to drive away in style, the rear-engined car sparks up and dies, and that summed what the Pontiac Fiero was, a car with potential, but with problems. It was released too early without proper R&D, which ended up further maligning Pontiac's already dicey reputation. 1999 to 2005 Pontiac Grand Am, a bestseller with issues. After the X-body disaster that was the Phoenix, the Pontiac Grand Am was brought in to reclaim some of Pontiac's lost glory. And it did sell okay for Pontiac standards, despite the fact that it had poor safety ratings all through. The car drove okay, but often had problems with its power steering, so got an average to bad rap. 1988 to 1993 Pontiac Le Mans. The last was the worst. At times, the Pontiac Le Mans did shine, considering its 6 generations. Introduced as a Tempest trim, the Le Mans also gave us the Pontiac GTO, for which we'll always be thankful. Sadly, by the end of the 80s, the Le Mans had lost most of its prowess and was a rebadged Daewoo, a subcompact with barely any power. The worst of the 6 generations, this was the end of the Le Mans, and not in a good way. 1995 to 2005 Pontiac Sunfire. The Sunfire replaced the Sunbird. It shouldn't have, because forget being better than the Sunbird, it was worse since it took cues from the Chevy Cavalier. The cabin noise was jet level, though the car did give a decent economy. Things seeped and leaked at regular intervals, Plus, everything was plastic and vibrated in a chorus that could give the driver tinnitus for years to come. 2000 to 2005 Pontiac Bonneville lagged behind the competition. It feels strange to include the Bonneville in a list of cars that killed the Pontiac, considering it lasted from 1958 all the way to 2005. But this is how the wind blows. The 10th generation of the Pontiac Bonneville was pricey, lagging behind the competition and a bit of a stylish flop. Plus, while the engine was okay, there were better and bigger ones around, which is why the Bonneville ground to a halt by 2005. 2000 to 2005 Pontiac Aztec. Two cars mashed together?
Unique styling certainly makes you sit up and take notice when a Pontiac Aztec comes down the road.
The very idea of releasing a car on the unsuspecting public that resembled a Frankenstein on wheels should have given Pontiac pause. Sadly, it didn't, and the Pontiac Aztec took everyone's breath away because of its sheer ugliness that invaded your dreams and ran you down with its strange hood. We'd say this was the car that killed Pontiac single-handedly. 2005 to 2009 Pontiac Montana SV6. Pontiac's love plastic phase. Hardly had people begun breathing freely on roads again, following the exit of the Aztec, that Pontiac upgraded its erstwhile ugly Montana into the uglier Montana SV6. It looked like a minivan Barbie would love, because of all that plastic. For 2007, they had to drop the all-wheel drive option, because the 3.9-liter engine generated too much torque. 2005 to 2010 Pontiac G6, the last of the greats. Technically, the G6 was a good car and rushed out any wrinkles left by the Grand Am, which it successfully replaced. But by this time, GM was in hot soup, and the only bailout they saw was to kill Pontiac on the whole. So instead of this car killing Pontiac, we'd say it was murdered by GM to make way for Pontiac's demise. 2005 to 2009 Pontiac Torrent, aged even before launch. With the Aztec having failed rather spectacularly, Pontiac yet again looked toward Chevrolet for a respectable version of a family crossover, thus rebadging the Chevrolet Equinox into the Pontiac Torrent. The Equinox was a bit aged when they did this, so the Torrent was always a step behind the competition. With Pontiac dying in 2009 and 2010, the Torrent was upgraded and made into the GMC Terrain. 2009 Pontiac G3. Too late, too little. A rebadged Chevrolet Aveo, the G3 was the final nail in the coffin for Pontiac. Despite this last effort by Pontiac to revive its sales, no miracle happened, and sales remained slumped. And so, when the last Pontiac G3 rolled off the assembly lines in December 2009, it marked the end of an era for the now-defunct carmaker.